host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
Right, welcome back. Let's continue now. 20 days. In fact, today marks 23 days countdown before the G20 Leaders Summit hosted by South Africa on the 22nd and the 23rd of this month. Currently representing over 2/3 of the world's population, the Group of 20, it was founded back in 1999 as an informal forum for the finance ministers and central bank governors of the most important industrialized and developing economies to discuss international economic and financial stability at large. Now, it will also be the first time that the summit is convened on African soil. Perhaps to chat a little bit more about the significance of the G20 Leaders Summit, we're going to be joined virtually by South Africa's G20 Sherpa Zane Dangor. A very good morning to you, Mr. Dangor, and thank you for your time in the SABC at this hour.
Good morning, Liezle. It's good to be with you guys this morning.
Well, the countdown continues, and we're obviously looking at elevating Africa's voice in all of this under the theme solidarity, equality and sustainability. But I think context is important. So perhaps you could take us back in 1999 when it was formed, how it's transformed over the years from being an informal forum, perhaps to one of the most industrialized and developing industrialized and developing economies, and when it then became elevated to include heads of state. Why is it so important for our continent?
So as you pointed out, it started off in 1999, it emerged from a G7 meeting in the wake of the then financial crisis. And then it was an informal meeting of foreign ministers and governors of reserve banks. But of course, with the 2008 economic and financial crisis, the leaders meaning the heads of state, felt that they also needed to play a role in shaping what emerges from the discussions and the crisis. So in 2008 was the first Leaders Summit. And in fact, it was between 2008 and 2009, there was 2 per year. So there was one in 2008, convened by George W. Bush. And then in 2009, both the head of state of the UK and the head of state of the US then, Obama, both had Leaders Summits in the same year. And I think it was because the peak of the economic crisis was then being felt globally. And after that, it became, on a more annualized basis. But the context issue is important. Yeah. Initially, the feeling that it's an informal grouping led by economic ministers, finance ministers, and governors of reserve banks. But there was also a feeling amongst many in society, in civil society, that we're asking the same actors that gave rise to the crisis to solve it. And that's why the agenda was expanded, leaders became more involved, and the discussions became more inclusive. And ironically, inclusiveness means the agenda expanded to look at issues outside of macroeconomics. Yeah. The impact of poverty, inequality. So that's the history, and this is where we are now. So that's why we have this forum that, of course, looks at the macroeconomic issues, global economic stability, but it also looks at the factors that give rise to instability, politics, issues such as debt, the role that inequality plays. So that's why you have the format where you have a Sherpa track, which works with leaders, but you still have what is called the finance track, which essentially is still your foreign finance ministers and reserve bank governors working together on a more narrowly defined set of financial issues.
Yeah, thank you so much for that context. It's so important to understand the global significance of all of this. And I wonder if we're speaking about those priorities, even linked to the 2030 agenda for sustainable development goals at large. Perhaps you could talk to us about some of those priorities at this point.
If you look at our theme, right? So we are solidarity, sustainability, inequality, equality.
Yes.
Our themes deals firstly with, and if you break them down, solidarity between peoples, and because you can't delink economies from people, solidarity between countries. But then, then it cascades into the issue of inequality. One cannot deal with inequality within a particular state, like South Africa, for example, without dealing with the factors that make it difficult for the states to do that. That is the global policies that frame the way that economic policies cascade, say, from the IMF and the Bretton Woods institutions to the abilities of nation states to do what they need to do. So our theme talks to what is important for the global South Africa, but it also links to the Sustainable Development Goals. You can't talk about dealing with harms to people and harms to climate without referencing the Sustainable Development Goals, which were agreed to by heads of state in 2015. This month being October is essentially the goal of the month is goal 13 from the SDGs, and that goal deals with climate action, and it deals very specifically with the themes that we also have in our G20, which deals with the need to be more adaptive to climate change, to build resilience, to ensure that we have the capabilities to mitigate and adapt at speed. So these are the themes that we've worked around. We've also built on what has been discussed in India, Brazil, Indonesia, and Italy. And what we've done is just make sure that we locate it and contextualize it within what is important for South Africa and Africa.
And to your point, Mr. Dangor, I mean, we're obviously looking at those priorities and the issues that this is all occurring, against the backdrop of a shifting geopolitical landscape. And I wonder if we honestly going to look at what has transpired to date, how are we not going to be overshadowed by some of those dynamics unfolding? How do we also ensure that this is translated into concrete action post the Leadership Summit as well?
Yes, it has been perhaps the most difficult G20 summit, and it's unfortunately we are the president this year in a very volatile political year. We just spoke about the SDGs and climate action and how important that is. These have become geopolitical issues. Whereas last year and the year before, on climate action, we were debating the financing modalities of implementing the means to deal with climate change. We're now back debating the science of climate change, whether it's real or not. The SDGs are now being seen as an imposition on the sovereignty of states by some of the G20 members and are actively blocking any reference to the SDGs. So geopolitics now also includes trade and climate issues. And it defines relationships between states as well. On the broader conflicts and wars, what we've done this year, as did Brazil, is we tended to locate that within discussions at Sherpa level and foreign ministers level to ensure that the very important work around, whether it's in the working group on food security, on climate change or environment, continues to take place without the geopolitical issues coming in and diverting attention. But we're now at the stage where we're getting to the end. The leaders will have to make a pronouncement on some of the very important geopolitical issues. And as Sherpas, we are leading the charge at the moment, and we will provide some text to the leaders in 22 days' time for them to deliberate and agree upon. The approach we're taking is it's going to be about principle. We're going to center international law. We're going to center the UN Charter. This was the basis for consensus in India and Brazil. And I do believe that just based on some of the discussions thus far, that we'll be able to get a similar consensus. So we don't see as horrible as the events are globally. We will engage with it, but it won't necessarily be the issue that determines whether we have a good consensus agreement or not. I think the issues that we're going to be really struggling with is climate change, trade, and issues around the SDGs.
Yeah, well, we know the working groups have done a lot to perhaps define narratives and gain that consensus. Declarations have also been put forth, a baton handed over from Brazil to South Africa. And I wonder if we're going to look at a certain agency, perhaps even just, calling for some of the reforms when it comes to, reforms of sovereign credit rating agencies, specific commitments when it comes to development at large. Is there anything you could speak to on that front to set a more firm a foundation for global economic stability as well?
So, some of the issues that have been making it very difficult for African countries and developing countries to move towards, more inclusive economies has been the cost of capital. And right from the outset, we said that this is important for us. Just to give you a context for how the cost of capital plays itself out, all countries borrow from the international markets. But African countries and many other developing countries tend to borrow at a much higher rate. And that debt burden means that many African countries default on development. So you're paying off debt instead of investing in education, in healthcare. And this creates instability within countries as well. So that we've made the cost of capital a really important part of our presidency. There was a discussion on this amongst the finance track and in Washington, D.C. There is an agreement, a consensus agreement that is emerged. And it does lay the basis for the G20 to take this agenda forward. Okay. But what we are going to do is at the Leaders Summit also overlay this to ensure that that agreement is also implemented in concert with agreements that have been made at the UN, particularly at the Financing for Development Conference in Spain, so that we accelerate action towards reducing the cost of capital.
Well,
in addition, we've also appointed a Global Inequality Commission. The report on that will be launched next week, and it's led by Joseph Stiglitz, and that will complement the work that's been done on the debt issues. And that lays the long-term stability issues around finance and economic issues.
All right, well, all roads lead, of course, to that G20 Leadership Summit that is taking place between the 22nd and 23rd of November. It's happening on the backdrop of a poly-crisis in the global environment. Zane Dangor, thank you for your time at this hour. South Africa's G20 Sherpa joining us bright and early, perhaps just to tell us about the significance of the G20 Leaders Summit as we, of course, mark the 23 days and counting before that event is taking center stage. It's all going to be hosted here in South Africa, as I mentioned, between the 22nd and the 23rd of November.